We tend to think of gameplay and story as separate components. The story is spaced out between gameplay, told through cutscenes, dialogue, maybe some occasional text logs, and when those scripted storytelling elements take a back seat, they're supplemented by more implicit elements. Things like environmental context are more in the player's hands to interpret, usually just reinforcing the explicit story they're already following. Very broadly, that's your average toolbox for video game storytelling. And it works! Many of gaming's greatest stories, and arguably some of the greatest stories period, follow this approach. It's just, for all the diversity of game designs, surely there's some tools more unique to the medium. The obvious answer is yes, of course there are. On the extreme end, you've got your genre busters like Papers, Please or Immortality completely redrawing the lines to fit their unique vision. But those are frameworks built around the very specialized needs of their stories, not exactly what you'd call a template. Plenty of games commit harder to narrative as the sole focus, and incredible stories have come from those. But narrative first has a tendency to mean gameplay second, to the extent that interaction is almost exclusively in the form of narrative progress, be that dialogue choices, deduction, or the more dubious title of walking simulator. In other words, if you don't resonate with the story, there's very little else to get out of these games. That is the experience. There's nothing wrong with that. These games know exactly what they are and aren't trying to be. Yet it reinforces this idea of separation between gameplay and story, like they're competing for their role in the experience. Does it have to be a trade-off? Are these really so fundamentally at odds with each other? Can a traditional gameplay-first game succeed with less traditional narrative design? Well, gameplay-first can mean a lot of things. If we're looking to unite these two, we're looking for a storytelling model that can share the spotlight. Something which needs as little time separate from gameplay as possible, something more pervasively blending into the moment to moment. So how do you tell a story without taking any time to tell it? Confronting that dissonance is as much a game design challenge as it is a narrative one. You're talking about games with an elaborate mystique to their worlds, yet only indirect ways of learning about them. Games which place a terrifying amount of trust in the player to figure out what's happening, without the usual narrative safety nets. You know, games like Hollow Knight has plenty of story, or more accurately, it has plenty of lore. That's a word you'll hear a lot when talking about these games, generally as a synonym for backstory. When we're talking lore, we're talking about background information, the history of characters, groups, settings, anything that fleshes out how and why this world got to where it is in the present day. In other words, world building. Now typically, lore is supplemental to a main plot. It's there to enrich the world for people who are especially invested in it, not to drive the core narrative. That's the first rule Hollow Knight sidesteps, presenting a world with a deep backstory that's mostly stagnant by the time you get there. In fact, a common thread you'll see with all these games is taking place in some form of ruined world, where the lore mostly concerns the past you witnessed the aftermath of. The story has already happened, it's secondhand, so from your point of view, it's all lore. What you learn of Hollow Knight's history is less important than how you learn it. Making sense of Hollow Knight's world, or even just most of it, is honestly pretty demanding. If you're only absorbing what's given to you at face value, it can feel like there's very little to work with. Characters speak of the past through terse riddles, cutscenes don't exist, and many of the world's biggest revelations are well hidden, completely missable even. Environmental storytelling is your most thorough source of knowledge, but that's still highly up to interpretation, or even what you notice at all. If you want to know what happened to this world, what exactly is the infection, who is this Pale King, who are the Dreamers, what is the Void, where am I, what is this place, wait, I'm not the Hollow Knight, who is, who am I even playing as? The ball's in your court to figure that out. These aren't just small details for superfans to pick up on, they're foundational questions, the backbone of the entire narrative. Leaving this entirely in the player's hands, something which takes serious focus, deduction, guesswork, and even note-taking to piece together, is inherently a high-risk style of storytelling. It takes extraordinary confidence in the player and an acceptance that some things will be missed based on individual experience. You want a player to connect at least enough dots to feel satisfied by the intrigue, but the amount it takes to click with someone is highly variable. Surely there's more to the style than just being vague and hoping people obsess over the scraps you give them, so how do you bridge that gap? How do you set the player up for success as much as possible? How do you convince them to put this unusual amount of effort into grasping the story? For Hollow Knight, the answer is a subtle mastery of pacing. See, Hollow Knight is very delicate about when it wants you to start really paying attention. The game is in no hurry to show its hand, playing things quite reserved in the opening hours. You get a bit of scene setting, Fallen Kingdom, monsters below, all standard fare. You're not likely to dwell on the details here, nor are you expected to. And that principle extends to the environmental design of these early areas too. None are lacking in curiosities, but the game isn't waiting for you to read too deep into things. The focus instead is on superficial elements, meeting likable characters, establishing general atmosphere, and only occasionally teasing the groundwork of something more complex. It takes no context to be charmed by Cornifer's jolly optimism or gripped by the stillness of Fog Canyon.
Watch out, watch out, watch out!
You can enjoy these at face value, endearing you enough to feel it's worth your attention when you come upon things you don't get. The clear turning point for Hollow Knight is the City of Tears, an area drenched in somber atmosphere and begging too many questions to not make you think twice about this world. It's no coincidence this is also where the game's world significantly opens up. Until now you're mostly on guardrails, but after the game sets up your real major goals, navigation is up to you. What this shows is the narrative design matching and enhancing the Metroidvania structure. This is the game letting go of your hand, trusting you to figure out the rest both as a navigator of its world and an archaeologist of its history. There's an important lesson in this. Hollow Knight doesn't expect you to be deeply invested right out of the gate, and rather than emphasizing its mysteries so bluntly as to place them center stage, it has the patience to withhold the depth of its lore until you have a reason to care. A more traditionally told story can assume a greater benefit of the doubt here. Portal famously pulls a trick which, on the surface, isn't so different. The opening test chambers keep a sterile focus on building up the mechanics. It's only once you've acclimated to both the mechanics and the setting that the curtain starts to pull back. Puzzle complexity evolves with the story as it becomes increasingly obvious something's wrong and worth noticing. By the time the twist plays out, the game's built up so much tension that you're eager for it. You're dying to see GLaDOS go full mask off, to graduate from test chambers to high-stakes breakout. Act 3's escape sequence is an immensely gratifying payoff because it culminates a game's worth of narrative and level design escalation. Both of those sync beat for beat in that 3-act format of establishing, deepening, and twisting themselves. Just when you've mastered the portal gun, just when you're straining at the leash to defy GLaDOS, you're satisfied on both fronts by escaping Aperture's facade. The tone shift and the level design evolution are the same thing. That's perfect pacing. The unconventional gambit Hollow Knight makes is placing that turning point in Act 2. You have your ramp up in the beginning with only hints of how much is beneath the surface, then City of Tears comes along and shoves you straight into the deep end. It's that same moment of the curtain being yanked back, except you missed half the play. What Portal uses as the moment of payoff, Hollow Knight uses as the moment of instigation. By leapfrogging the anticipation phase, it banks on having you engrossed enough by this point to issue its true terms of engagement. Not to find out what's next, to find out what you're missing. In a more conventional setup like Portal, a player will generally engage with the story until it fails to grip them. But here that relationship gets flipped. A player needs to be invested enough in the first place to put in the level of conscious effort the story asks out of them. The story isn't opt-out, it's opt-in. This is what Hollow Knight understands. If you're making a story people need to put effort into understanding, they first need a reason to put in that effort. Investment isn't free, it's earned. The greatest risk of this move is it forfeits that narrative benefit of the doubt. That raises a glaring question though. Why? Why tell a story this way when it risks such an inconsistent experience? The exact answer depends on the game, but Hollow Knight encompasses what I consider the 3 most common reasons. The first of these gets back to alignment with the gameplay. In Hollow Knight's case, finding things you can't figure out right away is perfectly in the spirit of a Metroidvania. Just as you'd keep mental notes of an unreachable path or clues for the future, the story asks for the same kind of attentiveness. The player is naturally steered into this type of thinking for both their mechanical progression and their grasp on the lore. It's easier to follow a hands-off story when the game already has you in a matching mindset. Take the Mantis Village for one example. You first come here prior to the City of Tears, so at this point the game's still playing coy. Your information is exactly what you see. This place belongs to the Mantis Warriors, you aren't welcome, and you can challenge their lords to a duel. They appear more intelligent than most of what you've seen up until now, with their own fighting style and the inherent sense of honor to a voluntary duel, but that's pretty much the limit of what you could discern for now. Their role in a larger world isn't known or relevant the first time you're passing through, but it becomes clearer in hindsight as your knowledge of Hallownest grows. Their truce with the kingdom, their duty to guard Deep Nest, what separates them from the infection, the purpose of this fourth throne, hell, the entire subplot of the traitor faction is a layer which only emerges much, much later into the game. Again, this is the story complementing the Metroidvania format. Just as the world expands mechanically when you get a new ability, the world expands narratively with every piece of information. This is the secret to making a drip feed of lore feel so exciting. You may not be told much, but every little insight you do get is a chain reaction of aha moments that paint a more complete picture of the past. There's an inherent curiosity to fallen civilizations. A decaying world is one with history to decay, the hands of time pulling things once known back into the unknown. Knowing every ruin you step through once had a purpose is an easy way to spur the imagination, a starting point for more meaningful questions. If the player can passively wonder what this room was for or that statue used to be, you have a foundation for active, engaged speculation. That itself is the second big reason for this style. The meat of Hollow Knight's story took place generations ago, a premise which doesn't lend itself well to more conventional storytelling. The game isn't being obtuse just for the sake of it. As tempting as it is to wish for every question to have a clear answer, the truth is this world would be less compelling if it were more explicit. Think what that would mean in practice. If you took all the implied information in Hollow Knight, everything you're encouraged to read between the lines on, and made that more overt, what shape would that take? Would it be constant flashbacks to show the past in action? Long-winded conversations narrating history to you? Contrived lore tomes dumping paragraphs of exposition? You would know more, sure, but is this story actually improved by being so concrete? By not leaning on these kinds of options, it makes it all the more impactful when they are used. The rare times a character deigns to share more than a few sentences, you sit up, you pay attention, you start hanging on every word. There's exactly one major flashback in the entire game, which it not only saves for an absolute mic drop of a scene, but even manages to cleverly justify the act of having the flashback within the lore itself. There's nothing arbitrary about it, nothing is at odds with the world Hollow Knight presents. Oh, and that show-stopping flashback sequence? Also optional. The whole thing takes a revisit to an out-of-the-way, already optional area with just one small clue pointing you there, and that's only after completing 2 other optional areas. This, like so many other story moments, is completely missable on a blind playthrough, but when you do find it, that discovery is genuine. That's the third reason. Trust is a risk, but the payoff deepens your personal connection to a world you're invested in. You found that secret, you figured that cryptic puzzle out, you put that lore connection together, not by following a script, but by assembling the knowledge from your own experience. That's an incredibly unique strength of this medium. Being able to decide your own level of engagement with a story is what can set game storytelling apart. Trust players to act in accordance with their interests. By being willing to let players miss some things, to accept not everyone will have the same experience, the discoveries any one person has for themselves become sincerely rewarding. With that mindset, we have our 3 big whys. As for how you tell a lore-driven story, well, we could always ask that elephant in the room. Hollow Knight didn't invent this style, and to be clear, neither did Dark Souls, but the Souls games were an unquestionably major influence in its popularity over the past decade. Part of that influence just comes from the broader advent of the Souls-like, but what is it about these stories that gets their hooks into so many people? So I said before for Hollow Knight that what you learn is less important than how you learn it. And while that's true, I think the real trick comes in the relationship between the two. Because what sets the best of these stories apart is specifically what information you need to work harder to understand. Dark Souls may be the poster child of this style, but its fundamentals are actually told to you quite plainly. You don't have to delve into item description cryptography to know who Gwyn is, for instance, and by the end of the game have at least some grasp on the meaning of your encounter. But if you know anything about these games, it's that you don't know everything. Like Hollow Knight, the worlds of Dark Souls and its inheritors are richly detailed yet willfully opaque. These stories are jigsaw puzzles. Every bit of knowledge is a puzzle piece. You find more pieces the harder you look for them, and the effort is turning that loose information into a cohesive whole. You can picture every one of those puzzle pieces as being plotted on 2 axes: how important that information is and how clearly it's given. Gwyn, as mentioned, is one of the most important topics that you're given clear information about. He was the Lord of Sunlight, he slew the ancient dragons to begin the Age of Fire, and he sacrificed himself by linking the First Flame, postponing the Age of Dark. Like most of these questions, its answer begets more questions, but you do know who Gwyn is, and, at least generally, why he matters. Clear and critical information has its place in this system. You still need a floor to build on, but these data points are few and far between, and drip-fed carefully. Where lore really starts to take emphasis is over here. This is the expected role of lore, supplementing the game through side plots, non-essential details, and layers of flavor beneath the surface. These can be as small as one-off mentions to a character you never meet or a place you never visit. There's nothing more to discover here, they don't tie into anything greater. They're more of a loose beginning than a loose end, just to add some color to the world and perhaps let a more imaginative player paint a picture in their head. Further up the scale, these can still sometimes be self-contained stories told in their own vacuum, but more often these are puzzle pieces of their own, on a much smaller scale, sure, but still contributing to the greater whole. A favorite device of Souls games is the item description, a mainstay all the way since Demon's Souls. To many, these are the true face of Souls storytelling. The contentious part tends to be whether or not that's a good thing. As with Hollow Knight, there's a level of stylistic trust to this approach that will always keep it from batting 1,000. Descriptions are the most upfront these games get with the bulk of their lore, so it's not hard to see why these don't connect with everyone. After all, isn't this the definition of telling, not showing? Well, yes, but there's several tricks at work here to distinguish these from your average lore notes. The first being that they literally aren't. These are functional items before anything else. The flavor text is an extension of them. Now, I know that just sounds like reiterating what's already an obvious definition, but I swear this is important to highlight. Compared to standalone notes, items have mechanical application. Why does that matter? Because picking up a lore note can be an entirely irrelevant action to some players, and however small that wasted time is, it creates a rift between valuable for story interest and actually valuable. That subconsciously frames the former as lesser. Item descriptions are both harmlessly out of the way if you don't care, and inherently in the way if you do. It's this two-pronged approach that encourages a player to care about a pickup one way or another, helping blur that line of interest between utility versus narrative. If this sounds like splitting hairs, consider the alternative. Imagine every item description was broken out into an independent lore note found elsewhere. Would you be equally excited for both? Or would you be quietly rooting for any pickup to be a real item that you can use and be disappointed to see it's just a lore note? How fast would you filter out the latter when all extrinsic motivation says you should? Brevity goes a long way here too, I should know. The success of this attached approach still all hinges on a player's willingness to make the pit stop of peeking the description tab, a willingness which rapidly dissolves based on the time it'll take to read. The lengthier the text blurb, the higher the risk of deterring someone from reading altogether. This is usually no fault of the writing quality, but rather the level of investment the game asks whenever the player is presented with an option to read. So it's not by accident that even the longest Dark Souls descriptions never exceed a few sentences, making these far more digestible as a 10 to 20 second reading detour. That's why I find it reductive to think of descriptions as just exposition dumps by another name. They are expository, but this piecemeal format, versus minutes-long speeches or encyclopedias, is transformative to the player's perception of and experience with them. It affords these games the flexibility to tell most of their story independent of active events. Again, like Hollow Knight, these are stories of fallen figures and decaying lands. You aren't around to see the events firsthand, but you can get the context clues from what's left. Item descriptions don't bear the full weight of storytelling, they're just your gateway into getting answers. It's environmental design, another strength of the series, which then plays the perfect complement. This is showing not telling at its most raw, dangling the hooks of curiosity to make you believe there's something in this world worth knowing. The writing wouldn't matter if the world weren't inviting you to ask questions in the first place. Hardly any text mentions the lower undead burg, for instance. But between its cramped streets, ambushing bandits, hunting dogs, burning corpse piles, and positioned beneath the loftier undead parish, you can get a good sense of this area's status purely through gameplay. And environmental storytelling can apply to more than just literal environments. Dark Souls mentions several other regions in its world beyond, like Vinheim, Thorlund, or Astora. These are typically just offhand references, not something the game draws much attention to. Instead, your context comes from the few characters and items from these lands that have made their way to you. You never see Kareem, for instance, but you do meet Oswald and Lautrec of Kareem and find some trademark equipment of the country. You only get a narrow lens to judge from, but their sketchy personalities and backhanded weaponry are enough to characterize a pretty cutthroat place. That slight amount of tangibility to a much larger subject adds a sense of history and scale to the world, despite the player having far from the full picture. Making you feel less like the center of the universe is essential to making a dead world feel alive. Having this mix of clear and interpretive details in all these side stories is fun, but this is still more or less the traditional role of lore. What's missing here is, well, what's missing? Important and obscured information. If you weren't given every piece of the puzzle, then the question becomes how many pieces does it take to understand enough of the full picture? How many missing pieces can you have and still be satisfied? It's easy enough to gloss over the questions that come from something like the Peculiar Doll. How did it wind up in the Undead Asylum? Why does it take you to the Painted World? How did the Painted World come to be? All unanswered, but nothing's really hinging on those questions having answers either. Contrast that with Ash Lake, a haunting place of seemingly towering importance, yet raises a great deal more questions than answers. What exactly is Ash Lake? How does it exist so far beneath Lordran's lowest depths? Are the distant arch trees linked to other worlds? Does it represent a relic of the world before the Age of Fire, or is it like this because of the fire's persistence? At a broader level, what really is the Age of Fire? What does the Age of Dark mean by comparison? Where did the first flame come from? What is humanity, or the abyss, or souls themselves? These aren't little details, these are foundational questions to the story. And while you can find many well-reasoned theories, they're just that, theories. The game itself is content to give no direct answers. So why do these games get away with leaving so much to speculation? For starters, while many questions go unanswered in a literal sense, they're conceptually coherent. Sure, there isn't a straight definition on the Age of Fire versus the Age of Dark, but we do see how the world regards them, informing the concepts both in-universe and for what they represent. It's apparent the Age of Fire represents a continuation of the world as it is, a maintenance of the status quo, and linking the fire is thus an act of perpetuation. The Age of Dark then represents an end, a change, and the fearful unknown that comes with that. Rather than addressing this world's concepts with direct detail, Dark Souls is more interested in exploring them through smaller anecdotes. Take the Undead Curse. All you really know up front is that humans are branded by the Dark Sign. Those branded are undead, reborn after death at the cost of their humanity. Those who lose hold of their humanity eventually lose their minds and go hollow. It's a lofty concept that connects to many others in this universe, but its actual depth comes from its role in much smaller stories. In the case of Hollowing, that mostly concerns NPCs. Logan is on a quest to discover Seath's ancient sorceries, yet when he does, he obsessively spirals and is eventually found hollow. By contrast, the crestfallen warrior is an unmotivated pessimist, who only goes hollow after he's finally forced out of his safe haven because Framp forgot to brush his teeth. They depict very different paths to becoming hollow, associating the loss of humanity with a broader loss of determination or will to go on. Logan's single-minded quest leaves him with nothing to strive for once he succeeds, while the crestfallen warrior loses his only contentment to a mild inconvenience and just gives up. Plots like these are how Dark Souls elaborates on pillars of its lore through context without spelling them out. And we can still go a layer deeper. Even greater than seeing how in-game characters experience hollowing is feeling it firsthand. Hollowing is as much a plot device as it is a gameplay mechanic. A player can't really feel the thematic implications of your character's hollowing, but given mechanical weight, they suddenly share a very vested interest in their humanity. Your human form is both your greatest lifeline against challenges by enabling summoning, and a target on your back by enabling invasions.
But who knows? Going hollow could solve quite a bit.
Connecting humanity to these systems lets the player feel their own version of the nuance this world sets up. The double-edged nature of humanity, the scarcity of this precious resource, and the potentially desperate measures you could take to acquire more. The narrative significance of hollowing is reinforced most by how it's felt outside of narrative contexts. When you're stonewalled by a difficult boss, perhaps on the verge of going hollow yourself, tapping into humanity to summon help, boost some stats, kindle for extra heals, it's a conscious choice to trade for that edge. Moments like these are narrative experiences. Dark Souls can omit plenty of plot info without losing any of its tone, because the game doesn't need to tell you this world is dying. You're living it. That kind of purposeful subtraction is another way the game can challenge your own thinking. When Kath advocates for ushering in the Age of Dark, you're predisposed to assume this is an evil path, not because you actually know what the Age of Dark means, but because it contradicts everything else you've heard. And while it's easy to dismiss Kath as a deceiver, it's equally fair to question that your own notions are only informed by sources with their own agendas too. Drawing your own conclusions is made more compelling not just because you have some skin in the game, but from the layer of uncertainty between what you do and don't know. That's the crux of why this works. These games balance their level of information clarity. These other three sections all work to support the existence of the fourth. Dark Souls could never justify its most ambiguous moments if it never gave you enough context elsewhere, not just to make you care, but to make you believe. Believe that there are answers for everything, to buy into this world enough to think if you could just witness this place at that time, you'd have your answer. The grand head fake these games pull is getting you invested in what you don't know because of what you do know. Imitators of this style often make the mistake of information imbalance, leading to worlds so opaque that you can't bring yourself to care, or worse, question if the writing actually has any answers at all. Refusing to give clear answers can't be an excuse for not having answers. As soon as the player doubts the story's legitimacy, their buy-in is completely shot. Speaking of, Bloodborne is very much cut from the same cloth, and while I promise I'm not going game by game again, it offers us a valuable contrast to Dark Souls both in its tactics and its goals. Balance of information really is the foundational piece, yet it's an extremely delicate one. Seeing what happens when you tip those scales can help us understand why some similar games struggle to feel as coherent, in rare cases by design. Yharnam more eagerly shrouds itself in mystery, opening with virtually no context and putting you in the back foot pretty much immediately. That's a position Bloodborne aims to keep you in. Just when you think you're beginning to grasp the key concepts like blood ministration, the healing church, the role of hunters, and the hunt, it hits you with the curveballs. Act 2 dials up the weirdness, with more hints at a larger cosmic influence, and by the time the blood moon rises, this world has completely spiraled into madness. You're always a step behind from really knowing what's going on. Bloodborne's series of narrative rug pulls is a fulfillment of its own motifs. Cosmic horror, the chase to understand what cannot be understood, and going mad in search of the eldritch truth. Reflecting this vain pursuit of knowledge back at the player is Bloodborne's way of making its themes felt. Where Dark Souls wants its answers to feel hazy yet always within reach, Bloodborne's are framed to feel just out of reach, as if you could grasp them with just a little more insight. Those ambitions set the game up to walk a very narrow rope, as the best experience is had when you're just teetering on that tantalizing line between confusion and understanding. Maintaining that position over the whole game is quite a big ask, further shrinking the range of players who will experience that optimal sweet spot. Bloodborne knows what it's doing here, it's just shooting for an even smaller target. For a more inclusive hook, the game leans much harder on aesthetic fascination. More style to grab you, less substance to lead you. What the game's giving you is tacit permission to look no deeper than the surface. If the gaps feel too big, then don't think too hard about all this. The trade-off here is Bloodborne's ability to be followed as a story is weakened, yet communicates its thematic through-line even more strongly. The other trade-off is that with an even less solid narrative foundation, there's all the more risk of just checking out entirely. Even before the cosmic twist, Yharnam's obscurity can easily read as inexplicable for the sake of it, filled with symbolism that never really goes anywhere without digging deep. And all of that's clouded into concepts of dreams and nightmares, layering it all in enough ambiguity to question everything, yet superficially scrubbing the point of questioning anything. That's a more dismissive take one could have, but I wouldn't call it unfair either. Remember, investment is earned. Bloodborne banks hard on its sheer aesthetics to do the initial earning. The bottom line isn't whether answers exist on an internal lore Bible somewhere, it's whether the player is given enough reason to believe those answers exist. Without enough context, enough reason to want to try understanding more, a player can quickly disengage completely. At that point, the most they'll get out of this world is a tour of weird sights. Now, it's not so wrong for a player to get out what they put in, but it's the responsibility of the game to make the first move. Feed the player's curiosity, satisfied just enough to give them legs to stand on. Speculating should be step 2. Let people's imaginations branch out from those initial roots of understanding into a more complete web of knowledge. Or to put that another way, if someone's reading theories and wikis after the fact, ideally that feeling should be, so that's how XYZ fit in. Not, oh, so that was the story. One's an epiphany that slots into the gaps of your own ideas. The other's so detached from the actual game experience that, in practice, it might as well be told through the same encyclopedias this style seeks to avoid. A good way to offset that risk is by throwing an occasional bone, a narrative moment that can still land with minimal context. Even if you're only vaguely familiar with Ludwig as a character, for instance, his fight still hits as a crescendo to Bloodborne's themes. It doesn't take a Healing Church history lesson to recognize what this is, a fallen hero's last gasp of humanity, persevering through beasthood in his final moments of clarity. Ludwig's tragic triumph is presented so effectively, I'd argue this scene works without any context. Freebies like these are scarce, but they're a valuable card to play as a means of snatching back a person's intrigue. When the player is equipped to understand its significance in the moment, especially a sequence so far into the game, it rekindles belief that the rest of this world can be understood too. The takeaway here is it's up to the game to balance information clarity, and failing to get the player invested usually stems from an imbalance. None of this works until they have confidence there is a real story and that it's worth knowing. The biggest modifier to pulling this off, the difficulty setting, is scale. For all the mystique of the Dark Souls universe, even just the original, it's been dwarfed by the utter magnitude of its open-world descendant. Elden Ring delivers on that Dark Souls but bigger fantasy, a world with far richer history, more prominent characters and factions, greater visual world building, layers and layers of connective sub-stories to unravel, everything a lore fanatic could want to sink their teeth into, right? And it is. In many ways, I'd say Elden Ring is From's greatest storytelling yet. Major characters are clearly set up while still leaving plenty to learn about, the open world discovery meshes well with this freeform narrative structure, and the lands between are a minefield of curiosity hooks. The biggest factor working against its lore isn't what it does wrong, just how much it does. You can count on your hands the amount of truly important characters in Dark Souls, not so for Elden Ring. Sure, it doesn't help that half the names start with M, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. You've got so many factions to learn the deeds and desires of, from the Redmanes, the Hornsent, the Volcano Manor Recusants, Mohg's Pureblood Knights, the Golden Order of the Two Fingers, the Frenzied Flame of the Three Fingers, the Albinorics, the Carian Royal Family and their splinter groups, the Crucible, the Black Knife Assassins, the Fire Monks, the Demi-Humans. Then you've got all their relations to work out. Who's aligned with who? Which ones are plotting against others? Who just dropped dead because you spoke to that other guy? It gets to be quite a lot to keep straight. Let's go back to that puzzle analogy for a moment. If Dark Souls gives you 50 pieces of a 100-piece puzzle, Elden Ring gives you 200 pieces of a 1,000-piece puzzle. You've got more to work with, yet it can be even harder to see the full picture just with what you've got. The sheer scope of Elden Ring starts to work against itself here. With lore so detailed, a world so vast, with so many important groups and events and symbolism and character relations to keep track of, all those loose pieces get tougher to mentally sort through. In other words, the minimum required effort to understand anything in context is more demanding than ever. The ceiling's been raised, and so has the floor. Now again, I'd argue Elden Ring largely overcomes this threat of scale to still succeed in telling its story. The boundaries of what's told clearly, what takes effort to understand, and what's left to speculation are all well balanced. It builds up the narrative skeleton, albeit a large one, to tell a satisfying, comprehensible base story while still leaving enough room to use your imagination. Check, check, and check. Mission accomplished, yeah? It's just... This is all starting to get a bit daunting, isn't it? Let's step back for a moment. The whole point of telling a story this way is to deepen the player's connection to the world, to not just hear a story, but to establish a two-way street of knowledge and intrigue. Hollow Knight, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, we've seen how they reframe the player's mindset to both accept they won't solve every question explicitly, and to apply their own interpretations as fulfilling answers. That's the gold standard for what gives those worlds hooks, how they drip-feed details, build credibility, and balance information clarity. But is there another way? Can you still earn that investment, sincerely, by removing all context? It doesn't take long to see the pattern in Shadow of the Colossus. You get a cutscene, you travel to where it points you, you fight a Colossus. Do that 16 times, that's the game. So okay, very rigid structure, but that's plenty of room to spread a story across each of those intermissions, yeah? Well, no, most of these just hint toward the next Colossus. They aren't here to develop any plot. It's ostensibly just the very bookends where any firm storytelling happens, and even those keep you tightly on a need-to-know basis. So what does that leave us with? You see Wander plead with a faceless deity to resurrect a girl, you're given a scant few details on the origin of the Forbidden Lands, and that's about it. This is all the meaningful dialogue you're getting until the very end of the game. And so, with all the elaboration of a Five Nights at Freddy's phone call, you're off. Off to slay the Colossi, of course. You may have lots of questions, but those are soon washed away by something far more demanding of attention. You know, the reason you're playing. At no point are these encounters framed as fair fights. The size disparity alone ensures Wander is always the underdog. And at first, that's all you really need. The intro gave you your catalyst to face these titans, now go ahead, feel the thrills, the triumph, the struggle. And you will feel those, not just in the way a game makes you feel like Spider-Man, but emotionally. Why? Anyone who's played knows the feeling, but why? Why do you feel such an emotional connection to Wander, a guy you don't know on a quest you aren't invested in to save a girl you know nothing about? How does Shadow of the Colossus break every rule of storytelling and not just get away with it, but become so revered? What makes this game tick? Is it just the sheer spectacle of the Colossi fights? Is it that the art direction is just that good, or the atmosphere is so captivating, or the music goes this hard? Maybe, but plenty of other games deliver on all that and more without resonating so deeply the way Shadow of the Colossus has. No, the secret ingredient is hiding in plain sight. It's interactivity. Cutscenes, dialogue, environments, flavor text, all of these are storytelling tools because they tell the player something, directly or otherwise. That's a fine definition, but it implicitly divorces gameplay from narrative. We tend to think of gameplay and story as separate components because they usually are. The balance varies game to game, but storytelling often runs parallel to gameplay as two bespoke parts. Cutscenes are the most binary example, but even more interwoven setups, like character chatter during gameplay, are still a form of decoupling. You could mute the game or put the controller down, and the other element still works. This is gameplay and storytelling happening simultaneously, not being the same thing. That's not necessarily worse, but it risks detachment by drawing subconscious lines between the two. A cutscene, even when the player is gripped by the story, still inherently asks the player to switch modes. Any loss of control can't avoid at least some degree of retracting immersion, especially if a player just wants to get back to the game. By setting the player up to think this way, games create a layer of disconnect between the story they're telling and the game they are. That's the trick. The cutscenes aren't where Shadow of the Colossus stuffs away its narrative, and the Colossi aren't where the story stops so gameplay can begin. They're where storytelling and game design stop competing. Any moment forgoing interactivity is a moment the player is a little more detached than they could be. Maintaining full control in what would otherwise be a QuickTime event is more than just an impressive technical feat, it's what keeps the abstraction of player control feeling so connected. The basic mechanics of a Colossus, managing your stamina, scrambling to find chances to recover, trying to maximize attacks before your window shuts, all of these are built to evoke a mutual desperation in both Wander and the player. The game design inextricably is the emotional backbone. The whole exercise is a subconscious bonding act with the player. You grow to care about Wander not because you know his backstory, but because you feel his struggle firsthand. You care about Agro because you've genuinely been through thick and thin together. Your bond is earned through gameplay and turns emotional. That connection feeds back into asking questions again, but this time not as a bystander. Now the questions this provokes feel equally personal. They come organically rather than from any explicit mystery being dangled in front of you. Rather the opposite, the game itself treats this whole loop as routine after the intro. It never begs you to ask. Yet it's that same rigidity which does spur your thoughts, perhaps the most likely one being some form of, am I doing the right thing? The death of a Colossus never feels triumphant. At first this defies expectations, but soon you're numb to the whole ceremony of mournful music and dark tendrils. The first Colossus has this ogreish appearance, easily fitting the bill of a monster to be slain. What interrogates you on that impression is the gradual diversity that follows. As they take on more wild and even noble forms, showing curiosity, frustration, pacifism, fear, the act becomes as routine as it is troubling. On paper, you're still the underdog, but when the sky itself reminds you of your mounting victory streak, are you really? Given minimal context, that opening question is the hook of curiosity. The experiential story is what makes you reflect, an opportunity you have in this little section here. If this game loop is a band, Traversal is the bassist. It's not the star of the show, it's not supposed to be, and you might even think it could be cut to just focus on the good parts. But the glue holding this game together isn't the highs of the Colossus fights, it's what those peaks deliberately overshadow. Their most obvious purpose is pacing, breaking up the marathon of Colossi fights to not become exhausting. But just like those fights, the gameplay and story are entwined here too. These quiet minutes of riding are a change of pace tonally as much as they are mechanically. You know the next Colossus is coming, and you're even given a hint to prompt your imagination, but until then all you can do is wonder. That's why these journeys could never be replaced by cutscenes. Keeping you in the driver's seat, even with the simplest, lowest stakes gameplay, is what keeps you connected enough to fully engage in those thoughts. Much like Hollow Knight or Dark Souls, this is a world that wants you to ask questions, but it's the same means to a very different end. As evocative as the Forbidden Lands are, there's very little to infer conclusively. These rings in the desert are conspicuous, there's nothing else in the world like them, and they could suggest some purpose in the distant past. Yet you'll never know a thing about them. They're just another oddity, one of many which Wander arrived far too late to know anything more of. So, what makes this any different than the Bloodborne effect? What makes all these unanswered questions acceptable here, yet when a Souls game goes too far, it backfires into apathy? It's true the Forbidden Lands lack answers, but critically, Shadow of the Colossus has the restraint to never pretend you can get answers. If this game had so much as one lore tablet or some equivalent, it would be given the impression there's something more to dig into, some concrete answers that are in your grasp. But there aren't. There's no lead stringing you along in a fake mystery, no hidden scroll spelling out all the answers. By never teasing you with answers to begin with, it never misdirects your expectations. That absolutist approach is what separates curiosity from frustrating uncertainty. Throw a bunch of cryptically written lore scraps into this world, and suddenly the information you don't get feels a lot more arbitrary. Here's the difference. The world of Shadow of the Colossus doesn't need answers because, unlike Hollow Knight or Dark Souls, it was never a story about the world. It's about Wander, and by extension it's about you and how you reckon with that connection. Leaving the Forbidden Lands open to interpretation doesn't deny Wander's story from being complete. They're the true mechanism of telling it. The thoughts this world induces aren't meant to be ones of puzzle solving, of considering all your clues and piecing together the world building like a Souls game. All these desolate landscapes invoke a purer sense of wonder, subtly steering you to dwell on what it actually cares about, your emotional response. These ruins exist not to make you think, but to make you feel. That's the difference between minimalism and doing the bare minimum. The story Shadow of the Colossus wants to tell doesn't succeed in spite of those absent tools, it works because they're absent. Even at its bookends, the only time this game does use traditional tools, it's done with great reservation. The ending has forever been cause for discussion, which itself I'd say is proof of success. Everything about this sequence is staged with the tone of a resolution without actually resolving many questions. Why does Dorman still uphold his deal? What does Wander's rebirth mean? Were you ultimately doing the right thing? It feels like it ends on a bittersweet note, but what does it all mean? This is the game's final push to ask yourself questions. We seek answers, we yearn for meaning as and after the credits roll. Every instinct tells you there's something more to find. Maybe you could even find it in a second playthrough or something? And every instinct is wrong. You don't find more answers after the ending. There isn't a great secret hidden in the Forbidden Lands. This world doesn't change, but you want it to change. You want it to have meaning. In any other game, this would come off as shallow, a cheap attempt to look mysterious without having anything to say. Why it works for Shadow of the Colossus is because you aren't left craving world-building answers, you're craving purpose to it. Emotional closure, not literal. This was always a story about your own reflection. Engaging in that yearning for more, for finding meaning in what seems meaningless, is the narrative experience it wants you to explore, even long after the game ends. On its own, tying game features to emotional cues isn't a unique trick at all. Back in Dark Souls, Firelink Shrine is meant to be your moment's peace. There's a special wave of relief to hearing that music again after a long journey away, something the game's structure pushes you to do for longer and longer stretches. Any bonfire is comforting, except this one! But only here do you feel like you've made it home again. So when Lautrec kills the Firekeeper and cuts off this bonfire, it's personal. Mechanically, this is the game pushing you out of your comfort zone. Emotionally, this feels like your house was robbed. That gut punch works on multiple levels because you've come to associate bonfires with safety and trust, likely never even considering that attachment could be violated. When you later get to pay Lautrec back, your retribution feels so much more satisfying than any grand betrayal cutscene could have ever fueled. Think about that. A basic checkpoint system, given context, is the root of such a sincere emotional charge. And that's just the obvious example. Hollow Knight obsessively adds narrative weight in its mechanics. Look at The Last Stag. Could have just been a fast travel menu, but instead that system is personified into its own endearing side plot. The Dream Nail is a tool, a key, an attack, and the secret text reveal are all in one, and while playing a meaningful story role which justifies those abilities. The surprise mutation of the Crossroads late into the game gives you a personal before and after look at the infection's devastation. As dormant as Hallownest is, it's an effectively unsettling reminder that your actions are beginning to shake it out of stagnation. There are other active forces in this world, and the kingdom isn't as dead as you thought. Wrecking the Crossroads repurposes an old area and reinforces the stakes. That's the common thread, isn't it? Very little of this game exists just for story or just for gameplay. Hollow Knight is eager to blur that line in the name of immersion. It's no accident another strength these games share is allowing extended periods of gameplay without interruption. When the game stops treating these as separate components, so does the player. What sets Shadow of the Colossus apart, what gives it that special touch, is how wholly it commits to this connection. If this is all starting to sound like it doesn't even fit the lore-driven moniker anymore, you're right. What Shadow of the Colossus performs is not lore-driven storytelling, but it is the logical endgame of that method. Not by content, by intent. Transcendence isn't just my flowery word to deify this game, it really is the simplest, most absolute realization of the same purpose. Yes, it prods your curiosity, your imagination, yet not in service to unraveling any complex world building. Remember, even in Dark Souls, that's not the final destination, just a stepping stone towards it. The true end goal is getting the player to emotionally engage with the world through a more personal experience with it. Hollow Knight deepens that connection by aligning its asynchronous lore with the already knowledge-based format of Metroidvania progression. Dark Souls uses this method to present its richly detailed worlds through a thin lens of personal discovery. If the story of those games is greater than the sum of their parts, Shadow of the Colossus figured out how to divide by zero. Games are too diverse for a one-size-fits-all approach to narrative design. While linear, cinematic titles have become the benchmarks for narrative prestige, lore-driven stories remind us there's more than one path to success. Games are empowered by a toolset unique enough to rewrite the rules of storytelling. The creative confidence to use it is what kindles experiences like Hollow Knight, like Dark Souls, and even the far fringes like Shadow of the Colossus. These games don't tell stories, they are stories.